Hello, this is Richard Ollie, and we're going to talk about the Singapore parliamentary system. For those of you studying in Singapore, this is absolutely necessary that you understand this. For those that are studying in Australia, it can be an interesting comparison or contrast with the parliamentary system in Australia that we've discussed. Singapore's system of government is modelled within the framework of a representative democracy. This concept will be dealt with more fully later in the lecture. Singapore has 5 years terms of office for elected representatives, and it is the majority vote of the constituents represented by a Member of Parliament that decides who will represent them. The Prime Minister is selected based on who the leader of the party is at that time, and that party must have won the overall election by having the most elected members of Parliament sitting. It is the Prime Minister with a majority of supportive members of Parliament that form government. The government in Singapore is modelled after the Westminster system. It has 3 separate branches: the legislature, or Parliament itself, the executive, and the judiciary. Parliament makes the laws. The executive, also known as the government and comprising cabinet ministers and office holders, administer the law, and the judiciary interprets the law through the courts of Singapore. This system of government is known as the Parliamentary Representative Democratic Republican model, where the Prime Minister of Singapore is the head of government and the President of Singapore is the head of state, not dissimilar to the Governor-General's position in Australia. The functions of Parliament include making laws, taking up a critical or inquisitorial role to check on the actions and policies of the government, and controlling the state's finances. Singapore's Parliament is unicameral. This means that it only has one house, and therefore no upper house or House of Review. The members of Parliament are voted in at the regular general elections, as we've already stated, and the leader of the political party that secures the majority of seats in Parliament will be asked by the President to become the Prime Minister. The PM will then select his or her ministers from elected MPs to form the government. The Speaker also has an important role, and this position, which is basically the chairperson of parliamentary processes, is elected when the Parliament first meets. The Speaker presides over sittings of the House and enforces the House rules prescribed in Standing Orders of Parliament for the orderly conduct of parliamentary business. The Speaker is elected at the commencement of a new Parliament, and the Speaker may not be an MP, but must possess the qualifications to stand for election as an MP as provided for in the Constitution. The Speaker acts as the representative of the House in its relations with other parliaments and outside bodies. The Speaker also welcomes visiting dignitaries and represents Parliament at national events and during official visits abroad. The Speaker is in overall charge of the administration of Parliament and its Secretariat. Second principle is that of separation of powers. The separation of powers is an important component of most modern democratic political systems. In simple terms, separation of powers requires that government be divided into 3 branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. Each of these branches must operate separately, and no member of one branch should also be a member of another. The purpose of the separation of powers is to balance and limit government power. Separating power prevents one person or group of people from accumulating or using too much power. The separation of power also provides a series of checks and balances so that if one branch of government overreaches its power or infringes on the rights of citizens, the other branch can intervene. The principle of responsible government is an important one. Responsible government is a conception of a system of government that embodies the principles of parliamentary accountability, the foundations of the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy. Governments, or the equivalent of the executive branch, in Westminster democracies are responsible to Parliament rather than to the monarch, or, in a colonial context, the imperial government, and in a republic government to the president, either in full or in part. If the Parliament is unicameral, such as Singapore, then there is no House of Review. Ministers are accountable to the Parliament for their decisions and for the performance of their departments. This requirement to make announcements and to answer questions in Parliament means that ministers have to have the privileges of the floor, meaning that they cannot be sued for statements that are made whilst on the floor of Parliament in a session. Lastly, the head of state is in turn required to effect executive power only through responsible ministers. So therefore the president can only act on the advice of the government. The president must never attempt to set up a shadow government of executives or advisors, or attempt to use them as instruments of government, or rely upon their unofficial advice. The president, as the head of state, is bound to take no decision or action which is put into effect under the colour of any executive power, without that action being a result of the counsel and advisement of responsible ministers appointed within the government. In turn, the ministers are required to counsel the president, explain to the president, and be sure that the president understands any issue that they might be called upon to decide, and to form and have recommendations for the president to choose from. The Singapore parliamentary system and system of government consists of branches. The government in Singapore is modelled after the Westminster system, as we've said. We've also said that it's a unicameral parliament, so there is no upper house, there is just the parliament itself. We've spoken about the role of the Speaker. The Speaker acts as a representative of the House in relation to other parliaments and also official visitors to the country. But also, the Speaker is basically the chairperson of the Parliament that makes sure that all sides are heard. The Cabinet, the Constitution provides for the organs of state, namely the executive or the cabinet, the legislature and the judiciary. The President as head of state appoints the Prime Minister and the other cabinet members from among the elected members of Parliament. The President as head of state appoints the Prime Minister, who is also a member of Parliament and who commands the confidence of the majority of the MPs that have been elected. Members of the Cabinet are appointed from among the MPs by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister leads the Cabinet in the administration of the government. The Cabinet is responsible for all government policies and day-to-day administration of the affairs of state. It is responsible collectively to Parliament. The Leader of the House moves procedural motions relating to the business of the House during sittings, such as to extend the times of sittings beyond the usual time as set out in standing orders. The party whip is an interesting position. This position ensures good communication within the parties and contributes to the smooth running of the party's parliamentary machinery. The whip lists the speaking MPs for each item of business and estimates the time required so that the sitting can be completed within the schedule. Often regarded as the disciplinarian in the respective party, the whip ensures that there are sufficient party members in the chamber to support the party's position and that MPs vote according to the party's line. Occasionally, the whip may lift the whip and allow MPs to vote according to their conscience, but this is rare. Members of Parliament consist of either elected non-constituency or nominated members. The majority of MPs are elected into Parliament at a general election on a first-past-the-post basis and represent either single-member constituencies or group representation consistencies. MPs act as a bridge between the community and the government by ensuring that the concerns of their constituents are heard in the Parliament. Elected members in group representation constituencies, or GRCs, the political parties field a team of between 3 to 6 candidates. At least one candidate in the team must belong to a minority race. This requirement ensures that parties contesting the elections in GRCs are multiracial so that minority races will be represented in Parliament. There were 16 group representation constituencies and 13 single member constituencies in the 2015 general election. There are also non-constituency members who are provided for in the appointment of MPs that are not voted in a general election. There may be up to 9 non-constituency members of Parliament from the opposition parties that can be appointed. This is to ensure that there will be a minimum number of opposition representatives in Parliament and the views other than the government can be expressed in Parliament. And then there are also nominated members. A constitutional provision for the appointment of up to 9 nominated members of Parliament, or NMPs, was made in 1990 to ensure wide representation of community views in Parliament. NMPs are appointed by the President of Singapore for a term of 2.5 years on the recommendation of a special select committee of Parliament chaired by the Speaker. NMPs contribute independent and non-partisan views in Parliament. And then there are members of the standing committees that provide input. These committees might be a committee of selection, selecting and nominating members to various sessional and select committees, committee of privileges, which looks into any complaint alleging breaches of parliamentary privilege, the estimates committee, which is about finance, the House committee looking after the comfort and convenience of members of Parliament and advises the Speaker on these, a public accounts committee which examines various accounts of government, showing the appropriation of funds granted by Parliament to meet public expenditure. A public petitions committee deals with public petitions received by the House, and its function is to consider petitions referred to the committee and to report to the House. And then there's the Standing Orders Committee, who review the standing orders from time to time. Responsible government, or representational government, refers to the political idea that representation is based on a person or institution acting on behalf of the people by representing their beliefs, attitudes and perspectives. The Singaporean political system is one which the people elect members of Parliament to represent them. Hence there is a system of representative government. These representatives meet in Parliament and perform a number of functions. They decide who will govern, they make laws, they debate issues, they make representations on behalf of their constituents to the government and the public service, and they monitor the expenditure of public money and the actions of Parliament. The Parliament is a practical expression of a simple reality. It isn't feasible for all people to be involved all the time, even if they were so inclined, in the business of government. Representative governments exist where people delegate the task of government to representatives chosen at regular elections. In this topic, we reviewed the various elements of the Parliament. We note that the Parliament of Singapore, in contrast to the Australian Parliament, is a unicameral system, meaning there is only one House of Parliament. There are a number of committees and specific roles which we dealt with in this mini lecture, and it's important that you understand it. Thanks for listening.